I remember that day vividly. I was 10 years old, and finally, after the long wait, the Mortal Kombat movie came out. The movie was fantastic. It was gripping, and the action was awesome. I mean, sure, in 2026, the film from 1995 looks dated, but back in the day, it was everything and more. And I wasn't the only one who felt that way. That movie stayed at #1 at the domestic box office for 3 weekends straight. It earned around $122 million worldwide, which was huge because this movie had a reported budget of around $18 to $20 million. As you can guess, by this point, the movie was the highest grossing video game to movie adaptation until then. And so, of course, Hollywood being Hollywood, they decided to milk the cash cow once again. They made a sequel in 1997, and much to everyone's surprise, that movie was an absolute disaster. I mean, one could say that calling it a disaster is an understatement. I'm not saying that people involved in the movie were careless, but some of the decisions they made, those made me really doubt the care and effort put into that movie. The sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, literally sits on Rotten Tomatoes with a proud score of 4% on the tomato meter. With a budget of $30 million, this movie barely grossed $51.3 million. And this hit the Mortal Kombat universe like a truck, to the point that there wasn't another theatrically released live-action Mortal Kombat movie for 24 years. So, with that in mind, you gotta wonder, what happened? That's what I'm gonna tell you about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this deep dive. The first movie worked because it actually understood Mortal Kombat. To understand why the sequel is remembered with so much cringe, you have to understand what the first movie meant to all of us. So let's go back to 1995. Paul W.S. Anderson made a deliberate choice with this film that I think no one ever gives him full credit for. See, we all know what the games are like, right? Gory, splatter heavy, and loads of fatality. Yeah, all the good stuff I know. But if we were to adapt all of that into a movie, then the movie would straight up look like a splatter. Now, Paul W.S. Anderson could have done that, but where's the fun in that? Instead, he turned Mortal Kombat into this Bruce Lee-esque movie with martial arts and characters worth dying for. I mean, look at Raiden. Christopher Lambert acted his ass off as Raiden, and I'm not going to take any criticism for it. Lyndon Ashby gave us such a memorable performance as Johnny Cage that for the longest time, whenever I would play the games after watching the film, I would think of Ashby. Robin Shou must have taken a lot of back pain after he was done shooting the movie, because holy hell, he literally carried the whole film on his back as Liu Kang. In a 2019 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he said, "It wasn't really about the action and the martial arts and the fighting. It was the dynamic of each character. You could really tell we cared for one another." He was truly the best call for Liu Kang. Look, I can go on and on about the characters and the acts, but that would make this video 2 hours long. What I'm trying to say is the actors gave it their all. And to pull everything together, we had the score. Oh my god, the score of this movie. Ugh. I wish I could experience the score for the first time again. I love it so much. It's this techno pulse music that basically shows off and complements every major beat, but in the nicest way possible, if you catch my drift. I think a modern equivalent of it would be how Labyrinth's music completes Euphoria. Paul W.S. Anderson walked away, and that was the first red flag. Anderson and producer Lawrence Kasanoff had their creative differences. They've gone on interviews and whatnot, stating how difficult it was to work with each other. Paul W.S. Anderson stated, "Larry and I had a bit of a bumpy ride along the movie, but we made a great movie as a result of it. I just wasn't keen on going back for the same ride." And he's right, because despite that, they managed to give us a film that was so real and beautiful that it stayed popular for 3 whole weeks straight. It eventually garnered a whole cult following. Say what you want, but this is not a fluke. Now, after this kind of success, of course, it's time for the sequel. So, Kasanoff went to Anderson and asked him to join him for the sequel, and Anderson said no. Yeah, that's right. Anderson chose to walk away from the sequel. He stated in interviews that he felt fulfilled with the first film and that he'd accomplished everything he wanted to. And he also stated in interviews that he knew what made the first movie work this way. From the looks of it, the second film's production had him going, this ain't it. He knew there would be institutional pressure and a compressed schedule again. So why go through the same thing twice? Instead, Anderson went for Event Horizon and the Resident Evil franchise. So you could tell Anderson knew how to build a franchise and stay with it. Hence, his not wanting to be associated with the sequel was the first red flag that the movie would not be in. But oh well, Hollywood doesn't stop for anyone, and it certainly wasn't going to stop for Anderson. John R. Leonetti was thrown into the deep end. So, Kasanoff decided to bring in someone else. He brought in John R. Leonetti, the director of photography on the first film, into the director's chair. In his mind, it made sense. They'd worked together previously, and the first movie came out great. Leonetti already had an idea of the characters and everyone, so why not keep it in the family? Kasanoff actually went on record to say, "We had a good relationship, and we worked so well on the first one that we just tried to keep it all in the family." Even Anderson supported the hiring of Leonetti, stating that Leonetti was instrumental to the success of the first film. Anderson said, "Mortal Kombat was my first studio movie, and it was so much bigger than anything I'd ever attempted before in the UK. And John helped and dragged me through the process. He was a wonderful ally. He was also a good partner." But here's the thing though, being a director of photography and being the director of a movie are two very different jobs. Plus, given that this was a sequel with a lot of money involved, Leonetti was basically getting the most pressurized debut ever. Now, since then, Leonetti has directed Annabelle and other movies, so clearly he knows how to direct a movie and do a great job at it. The point is, he shouldn't have been forced like this, you know? He said it was almost like as a whim, as a joke, they said, "Would I be interested in shooting the second one?" I said, "I'd love to, but I think I'd rather direct it." It just popped out of my mouth, and 2 weeks later, I was directing a $35 million movie that was on 4 continents. The cast started walking away. As if this wasn't enough, the cast started to walk away. Starting with Christopher Lambert. His Raiden was literally the most recognizable part of the 1995 film. And according to the actor, when he read the script for the sequel, he knew that the script needed more work. He even told Kasanoff about it. But Kasanoff told him that the studio wanted a movie, which is a very polite way of saying this is it. So Lambert refused and walked. On the other hand, Kasanoff stated that Lambert was actually on another project and there were issues with money and release date. That's why Lambert walked. You can choose who to believe, but this is how we got James Remar. Remar is an extremely capable actor, but given that Annihilation picks up pretty much right where the first movie left off, it means that suddenly Raiden looks and sounds a lot different, which was a big break in the flow for fans. Bridget Wilson, who gave us a memorable Sonya Blade, didn't return to the project either. Neither did Gregory McKinney. His role as Jax was replaced by Lynn Red Williams. Chris Casamassa, who played Scorpion in the first film, also didn't reprise his role. J.J. Perry played Scorpion in Annihilation. The returning cast members were Robin Shue as Liu Kang, Talissa Soto as Katana, and Keith Cook. Now, Keith Cook played Reptile in the first film, but in the second film, he was recast as Sub-Zero. I don't know why they did that, and there's basically zero acknowledgement for this. So all in all, out of the original cast, only 2 people returned to the same roles that the film spent 90 minutes developing. Every character the crowd was attached to was basically gone. And then we have Johnny Cage. Look, Lyndon Ashby gave Johnny Cage a swagger that no one had. Cage was basically the center of the film. He was so charismatic as a guy who's basically wearing his ass as a hat, and no one could have recreated that performance. As it turns out, they didn't even try. Johnny Cage got the worst send-off possible. When production reached out to him, Ashby was open to return. He read the script and realized they'd written a really crappy part. And I'm not joking. He said, and I quote, "I was doing something else when they did the sequel, and they wrote a crappy part. I didn't like the sequel script. I didn't like the part they wrote for me in the sequel, and they weren't going to honor my sequel deal. So in a nutshell, that's why." But Kasanoff, of course, has his own version of the story, as stated in Luke Owen's book about video game film. According to Kasanoff, the audience test screening didn't react well to Ashby or Bridget Wilson the way he'd expected. So the money conversation with the actors wasn't worth it for them. So they just stayed with Talissa and Robin. With Ashby's departure, Kasanoff decided to cast Chris Conrad as Johnny Cage, who physically resembled Ashby enough and then killed the character off in the first 5 minutes. There's literally no meaningful dialogue for Conrad as Cage. The only notable scene you have with him is when he removes his sunglasses on screen. Then, Shao Kahn breaks his neck, and we move on with the film like nothing happened. Like the romantic lead and one of the most beloved characters from the franchise didn't just get killed off. And when asked about this decision, Kasanoff said he wanted to shock the audience. I mean, I get it, but this isn't Game of Thrones. We didn't tune into a movie just to watch Johnny Cage get killed. The rushed production crushed the screenplay. With just 5 minutes, Mortal Kombat Annihilation makes it evident that it doesn't understand what made the first film work as well as it did. Now, you could argue that the bad decisions galore that I just described had their reason. There was a lot of pressure behind the production at the time. You see, New Line and Threshold were under pressure to get a sequel out quick. The production had under 2 years to basically make a screenplay, get a replacement cast, film across multiple locations, with production accounts pointing to places like Jordan, the United Kingdom, Wales, and Thailand, and complete a post-production pilot pipeline with full visual effects. That's a lot of work with a near impossible schedule, even if the budget was $30 million. So of course, there were going to be parts of the movie that wouldn't get as much attention as the rest, and the screenplay bore the brunt of this hectic schedule the most. Screenwriter Brent V. Friedman actually described the experience in Owen's book, stating, "I was told, hey, this epic battle that was 4 pages long now needs to be a 2-person battle that's 2 pages long. When you cut out a big sequence like that, the whole movie suffers because it was designed to be a big action set piece at a very specific point in the movie. There was supposed to be this really elaborate and high-tension prison break scene with Kitana, but we didn't see any of it because he was either gutted or removed entirely." Friedman went on to describe the screenplay as something akin to patching plot points with Band-Aid, to the point that there was nothing that made sense. Everything in the movie was gutted and flatlined. Too many characters, not enough movie. Speaking of which, I have to talk about the villain roster of this film. This movie attempted to introduce Shao Kahn, Sindel, Motaro, Milena, Shiva, Rain, Ermac, Nightwolf, and many others across roughly 93 to 95 minutes, depending on the listing. And I don't know about you, but this is already too much. Several of these villains appear, fight briefly, and then disappear. At some point, it felt like fan service put on steroids. It just didn't even make any sense. Yeah, the villain's here, but why is he here? What's the purpose? Who knows? And audiences didn't appreciate this lack of clarity because the film just looked more and more crowded. Some production accounts and fan discussions have claimed that there were ideas to bring Cage back in some form, but nothing like that made it into the theatrical cut, because the film couldn't even be bothered to follow up on the death it had actually created out of nowhere. The movie looked cheaper than it should have. Now, let's talk about that $30 million, shall we? It's nearly double the first film's reported $18 to $20 million budget. It was shot on 4 continents. You would assume it would look expensive, right? But it doesn't. Every shot is covered in post-production color grading to a degree, and some scenes just look unfinished. They flew everyone around here and there, and they ended up with a movie that looks like it was shot like a low-quality YouTube video. But wait, it gets worse. Here's the thing that pisses me off so much. Kasanoff actually went on record and stated that the film we got in November of 1997 was actually not a finished film. He knew they weren't done, but since the studio said they didn't care, they didn't have a choice. New Line pressured them to meet a deadline, even if it meant giving the movie a death sentence. The only thing that the studio used as a defense was the test screening data. See, New Line had screened the unfinished cut to the core fan. They were happy to see their favorite characters on the big screen. It wasn't like they were trained to see the visual effects failing or something. So with their positive feedback, New Line told Kasanoff to stop the reshoots and spending money. Kasanoff genuinely believed that 6 more months on the film would have created a fundamentally different film. But who cares? Studio had a different idea, and they had the data to back them up. And throughout all of this, Robin Shou showed up every day. He was the backbone of the first film, and now in the second film, he had to act out a beloved role with practically strangers with a script that had bigger holes than a strainer, and man did he try. He gave his all to these scenes. He reportedly tried to step up fights so that fans had something to hold on to, but nothing worked out. He tried a lot, in fact, but when you have nothing to work with, you end up with nothing in hand. And finally, the box office results came in, and it was horrible to say the least. The box office drop finished the franchise for decades. Using the rough industry logic that a movie often needs to earn well above its production budget once marketing costs and exhibitor cuts are considered, Annihilation's $51.3 million worldwide gross didn't look strong against the $30 million budget. The first film grossed roughly 6 to 7 times its reported production cost. This one, only about 1.7 times its production budget. I ain't no mathematician, but those numbers ain't looking good. And they actually had a third film plan, titled Mortal Kombat Devastation, which Ashby had read. That was obviously canceled because the second film made peanuts, and the theatrical live-action Mortal Kombat film series stayed dormant until the 2021 reboot. For 24 years, there was no goodwill to hold on to because Annihilation had truly annihilated everything for Mortal Kombat fans. But for what it's worth, at least the franchise made its return. The fandom of Mortal Kombat had always been alive and active. We just needed something that respected and loved us as much as we loved and respected the characters, you know? Annihilation was not it. It removed everything that we loved and respected one by one just to meet a deadline. Everyone worth holding on to left, and the screenplay that would have drawn us was butchered. And for what? Some contracts. That's the showbiz for you. It takes miles if you give it an inch. If this hits close to home, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, ring that bell icon, and let me know in the comments if you guys watched Annihilation. How did you feel after watching it? Were you confused? Or did you look at the movie as one of those so bad it's good movies? I want to know. Also, if you know someone who likes Mortal Kombat Annihilation, don't forget to share this video with them, alright? I'll see you guys next time. And as always, stay marvelous.